Eight, eight. Yo. Woo. Yo. Greetings and good vibes, everybody. It's been a little bit. It's been a little while. Um, we got some stuff we're gonna get into today. A lot of interesting stuff, y'all. Um, I'm joined with a guest, and we're gonna be talking about a lot of stuff that you're hearing about on mainstream media. You're being inundated with it, but what is really going on? What are your opinions on what's going on, and why are we being inundated with all this shit, right? So of course today I have a guest, friend to the Leon Block. He's been on here numerous times speaking about tons of other stuff. I think the last time you were on here we were talking about Dave Chappelle and that whole situation. So I want to welcome everybody, John Maina, back to the Leon Block. Thank you for being on here, brother.
Oh man, I appreciate you all, and it's always an honor to come and talk about the people and with the people. So always a great honor. Thank you.
No doubt, no doubt. So honestly, we could really just jump right into it. I've been very quiet right off the bat about these specific topics. And for all who don't know, we're really going to just say it: Russia, Ukraine, the Western powers, if you will, or NATO powers, whatever you want to call it. What is this fuckery that's going on? And my first thoughts were, let me sit back and see how everyone else is reacting to this first. And let me not be the negative Nancy in the room, but people can label me that if they choose so. So, John, like, you were the first person that spoke on one of my posts, and you attached it with an article. So just real quick, give us a backstory on what that article was about, and then we can just slide right into it from there.
So, as two African American gentlemen from the United States, the article was from the Hood Communists, and it was, "What does Ukraine mean to us as Black folk?" And understanding us living in Western European culture, dominated continent, right? We have this lens of what our history means, and our history sees us as a victor, as the good guys when it comes to any type of conflict overseas, not necessarily domestically, but foreign and overseas. You will find that the history is very much washed and propagandized. And so what ended up happening was, as you guys all saw, was in January, the world was getting on edge for a possible Russia Ukraine issue. And there was so much backstory, so much history to it, which we will get into. But at that point in time, there was no war going on. Or I think it was day one. It was super early in all of this. And I just wanted to post something because what was happening is, when we have war efforts in this country, and I can say this to Jontel because he is exactly my peer. I think we're about a year or two apart in
Yep.
age. We lived through the war on terror and Islamophobia, and a united front against Islam through 2001, post 9/11, through the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. So, like, we were in our preteens during all of that. So that's a very vivid memory we have. And one of the most dynamic things about that was, we all as a country agreed and thought it was okay to go to war. And I remember feeling how I felt about Ukraine with the Islamophobia that came from us being united after 2001. And I was like, wow, what does this mean when all the news sites, all of the people rally around this one idea, this one concept, this one person, this one country? What does that usually mean? And do we usually have buyer's remorse from it? So that was just some quick history that I was able to do and gather and discern from, when I was like feeling like, oh man, this Ukraine thing just doesn't sit right with me. And so the Hood Communist article just kind of goes into making Black people remember, who are we dealing with? And we're dealing with us, the country, the United States. We are an oppressor domestically. We are oppressor domestically. We oppress the poor. We oppress women. We oppress our trans brothers and sisters. We oppress Black, Brown, Latinx. We still oppress our indigenous brothers and sisters. We're wiping out the history of Black people as we speak in our southern states. So to think that there's a domestic situation going on where we're going to be on the right side of it because, we just don't know what's going on, that's naive. And the United States and our institutions are banking on us to do that. So the article just kind of gave us perspective that as Black folk, you have to be diligent to understand that this same oppressive country that's where we're from is doing the same oppressive acts.
Yeah. In other words, if they're not good to us, how the fuck are we going to be good to any other fucking country? What makes us think that we're the good guys anywhere else? First of all, what's good and bad? How is this right and wrong? What other country is wrong? What justifies as wrong?
And I'm going to answer that for you.
Because I know at one point we're going to get into ideologies and what ideology is right and what's wrong. I'm
going to tell you which one's right here. There's only one side to this, and I want you to all take this side with me because there's no argument, there's no debate for it. There's only one side in this whole Russia, Ukraine, NATO thing, and that's anti-war. No war. That's the only side you can do.
Yes.
It's the only side.
Agreed.
Anything else is propaganda, most likely from the West, or legitimate war crime concerns from Putin. I'm going to be very intentional with how I explain Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and America because those things are very important.
Yes.
So you let me know where you want me to go next.
We can get right into that, actually.
All right. So what is going on with Ukraine? How do we get here today? So Ukraine historically is a country for the last 100 years has struggled with fascism. Okay. To understand this from its highest level, right? When you think of World War II, you really only think of the German forces as the main contributors to Jewish genocide in World War II. But really, fascism and the ideas of what we call far-right ideologies of ultra-nationalism that exert oppression, right? Was way greater than just Adolf Hitler. That is a whitewashing of history. When you think of only fascism or Nazism in just Germany, that's not real. It was very much a problem throughout all of Europe. Ukraine being a faction of Eastern Europe at the time. They were actually a part of the USSR at the time. At that time. Yeah. And so understand this much. Ukraine has, I don't know if you can get up here like a map of where Ukraine is, but Ukraine is located in a very strategical place. If you look at Russia on the map, Russia is very hard to access. Ukraine, if you're talking about like a war, or if you're talking about resources, Ukraine is ripe with oil. Ukraine is ripe with ports. It is really only one of the only places you can access Russia if you're talking about any type of military intervention, right? For most people who do not understand a military intervention is essentially to have a war, you have to create a pipeline. And to create a pipeline, you need bases, you need access to natural resources, you need access to food, you need access to the places where you can have your medicals, all these things, right? So whenever we're talking about a war, if you don't have a supply line, you're doomed to fail because you'll be cut off and stuck in enemy territory. So Ukraine is set as like this really weird country that's like really just strategically placed in Russia, and it's been essentially since World War II and many wars before this, kind of this sometimes allied to Russia, sometimes allied to the others, right? And they've been notorious to switching sides over the last few centuries, because it's literally that split there, like where the ideologies come from. But what you need to know is that Ukraine has a history of fascism, and their history before the USSR is of monarchs and capitalism and fascism. So that's talking about how they were governed as the USSR was formed and they joined it. Obviously, understanding what the USSR, they were part of that union where they were advancing the needs of the people through socialism, and a lot of that's just not taught accurately in public school. But we don't have enough time to get through that. Moving ahead, like I was saying about Nazism and World War II, there was a very big faction in the Germans when they went to storm Russia, right, where they were going to Stalingrad, Moscow. They used Ukraine to enter the country, Russia. That was their base, right? And so when at that point in time, with Ukraine being a part of the USSR, they were aligned with Russia, but there was a part of Ukraine who allowed the German army in there and did not fight them. They were talking about 1939. They did not fight them. They allowed them in there and they joined them. And they helped them slaughter. I'm talking about several different ultra-nationalist parties. And there's a nationalist by the name of Stepan Bandera, one of the most famous Nazis from Ukraine. They led this nation where they themselves in Ukraine almost butchered 250,000 Jewish Ukrainian residents between Ukraine and Poland. That's not taught. So like Ukraine has a history of fascism and Nazism. That's when people say Putin here, he wants to denazify Ukraine, there's accuracy to it, but there's nuance to it. What you have to understand there's a
that
point.
Part.
I would argue that Ukraine's Nazi problem is probably, if not, it's probably in line with where our Nazi problem is, right? If you look you really look about it, like ours is a little bit more subvert, but it's like it's there. If you look at January 6th, if you look at like the Proud Boys and some of these other things that have a Richard Spencer, just a lot of these people that got a lot of clout during the Trump era too, or just Trump himself, right? So the Nazi problem worldwide is a bigger. The Nazis and fascists are opponents to socialism, and that's why they're still around. So if you think about like what issues that happened in World War II, right, where like one of the biggest human rights massacres of the last 200 years. This is one of the biggest ones. I'm not saying it's the biggest one. I don't do the Torture Olympics. We're not going to engage in that here. But there's absolutely no doubt that was one of the most biggest genocides of humankind. And we allowed the world to still have Nazis in them.
We just spread them out.
But the United States and the CIA, and these are documents that were declassified, right? They were using this is the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. They were using Nazis as assets in Ukraine to Nazify Ukraine. Like these are things you can Google because the documents are declassified at this point. And so moving forward, my larger point is Ukraine is a very divided country on their ideologies, right? You got Russian speaking folk, you got a Jewish population there, you got a population of fascists, you have this melting pot of people in this huge country. So there's when you come to talk about Ukraine, you really can't get in there and really have an understanding of it unless you really understand the geography, the people who have their allegiance or want to be aligned with Russia, the people who want to be aligned with Europe. There is a lot going on there. And so what ends up happening is in 2004, there's an election. And at that point in time, Viktor Yevchenko beats out Viktor Yaganovich in an election. And it was one of those things where, and there's a lot, when we get into this right now, there's a lot of similarities between what happened with Trump and what happened in Ukraine. It's really scary if you think about it. What ended up happening was there was a lot of issues with that election where they were claiming fraud. The election was so close. It was one of those things where it started this big this big domestic issue in Ukraine just over that election. Eventually, Yevchenko, who is a friend of the United States, is elected in. They do a recount. It's just this whole thing, and it looks mired in corruption, right, and scandal. And this happens in 2004. This guy, who's essentially like an American asset, then makes this Nazi Stepan Bandera. You can Google him. They label him a national hero of Ukraine. This is stuff that's going on in 2011. This happened in 2008. They made a literal Nazi a national hero. They declared him that. So when I talk about Ukraine and how complex it is,
yeah,
I do not like when I see people put up the flag, I stand with Ukraine. You do not know what that means. You need to just hold tight. Like it's just stand to the side. You can stand with the people, but be very careful putting that flag and that symbolism and doing what the liberal knee-jerk reaction is, right?
That part. Talk about it.
What ends up happening is, fast forward, because like I said, Ukraine is pretty much politically divided. There's parity there. There's legitimately. So in 2010, Victor Yevganovich beats Yevgeny,
whatever the fuck his name is. Yeah. Go ahead.
And so what ends up happening in a democratically won election, and so Yevganovich, he denounces Stepan Bandera's his hero. He takes that out. And what ends up happening, I want to be very clear about Yevganovich, because there is nuance that needs to be talked about there. He's a capitalist. He has his own corrupt policies, but he was at his core elected democratically. And that was what we have to understand is when there's an election that happens democratically, why are we getting involved over there? That's the first question I'll ask. So what ends up happening, right? And this is Jontel, this is gonna like blow your mind. This is literally what happened in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. But what ends up happening, right, is Yevganovich is the president, and he's trying to maneuver what to do with Ukraine. Ukraine is in Europe. They're not a part of the USSR anymore. The USSR is not a thing anymore, right? And so there's this thing called the European Union. And for all of you that don't know, this European Union is a stable, centralized network of European countries that come together to make trade agreements, and they have a centralized currency, and it's the benefit of the continent.
In some sense, it's reminiscent of like the way that the U.S. up in some way.
Kind of, yes.
That's the best way that to get people to understand, yeah.
And so Ukraine was not a part of it, right? And so there's benefits to being a part of the EU,
right?
And so there was this impasse where the EU was about to invite Ukraine to the EU, right? But it was on a shiesty deal. It was like an association deal, right? And this is like something that the EU gave to Greece after they collapsed. Now, for you guys that don't understand what happened in Greece, Greece collapsed financially back in 2000 and shit. It was
like 14.
It was almost 10 years ago. I don't know the exact. I don't remember the exact dates, but they essentially got knocked into the associated agreement because they required so much rebooting and like all this, so many complications. Like they're talking about at one point in Greece, like where the ATM stopped like putting money out. Like it was in
I remember that.
And so that's the deal they gave. They were not offering Ukraine a full membership. It was an association deal. So at this point, Yevganovich had been playing in the middle, and that might have would have caused him his demise. Right? Is he decided he wasn't going to side with Russia on anything. He wasn't going to side with the EU, but he did want to be a part of the EU. Let's be very clear about that. Under a normal EU deal, and the EU did not present that, and they also pushed him to the door and said, "Hey, if you don't join now, you will never be able to join again." So what happens is now the Ukrainian people get whiffed of that, and they have these massive protests, peaceful protests, beautiful protest, saying we really want to be a part of the EU. Don't fuck this up. And it's met and it's received well. This happens like in November of 2013. So what ends up happening is they're protesting, and then the United States, while Russia is dealing with the Sochi Olympics, right? They come in there through their U.S. ambassador and the assistant secretary of state and our then Vice President Joe Biden. They orchestrate an admin change. And through these things called NGOs, which is a non-government organization, they started to funnel money to different sects of right-wing groups in Ukraine to push through a coup d'etat in 2014. George Soros, and this is George Soros, who has a foundation, gave $399,000 in the advancement of this coup d'etat. This is all factual. This is stuff you can all Google. Like, so what you have now, right, is this effort, this monetary effort, right, from the Western world to destabilize the Ukrainian government. Well, John, why would the Western world want to destabilize Ukraine or put their own person in there? Well,
I wonder.
Ukraine is what did I say about World War II? Ukraine is a great access point to Russia.
Yep.
If you were going to look at it from an imperialist standpoint, what was one of the biggest factors for Iraq when we went there? It was so that we had a place if we ever needed to go to Iran. If we wanted to have that war with Iran, we had control of Iraq. Now, getting back,
but also, while we're on that, it's also a way for us to get a better stranglehold on the other ideology of the world, or one of the other ideologies. And we're right there on his doorstep.
Right. So throughout the next couple of years, NATO is beefing up. They're adding more money. They're adding more countries, right? And at this point, there's no reason for NATO to still exist. It's the North Atlantic Treaty, right? What in the hell? Where's Ukraine located? Ukraine is not located in the Atlantic. It's not.
No. Oh, no.
Ukraine. Like what? Like the countries that are like
precisely
the fucking wars that NATO's gotten involved in, or coup d'etats, or interventions, have none of them have been in the North Atlantic. It's that's the name in their thing. All right, and so you have NATO trying to invite Ukraine, current day Ukraine, into NATO, which causes a security threat for Russia. But let me just back up here. So 2014, the protest keeps going on. This is why I said you're gonna be kind of triggered when I tell you about the protesting. So with the outside government agencies, right, they started to fund these right-wing extremists to then go agitate at the protest.
Right.
And there was a bunch of things going on, from staged murders to deaths, and like staged assaults. And like by this time, with all this money flowing in, Ukraine was able to create 3 new media factions to put in pro-protest news, right? And so the spin was going on at this point. So what ends up happening is Yavchenko sees that this is a problem, right? And he immediately comes to the table. Like this started in November, and by like February, he's like meeting with the opposition, right? And they come to a deal, an agreement. Like they absolutely do, because this is bad for business. Because at this point in time, the outside agitators, who are these neo fascists, right? Who are these Nazis, right? They're called one of them is called the Right Sector, the other one's called Azov Batal. Like all of these agitators are causing violence, and about 100 Ukrainian citizens are murdered, actually, because at this point you have people in a crowd throwing things, shooting, and then there's innocent people in those crowds getting murdered.
And hold on, when was this?
This is 2013 going to 2014.
Got you.
So here's what happened. So this was already going on. So the massive protests.
And hold on, when was this?
What? The Maidan coup? 2013, 2014. So what ends up happening is they come to this agreement in February, right? And it doesn't even matter at this point. They're so destabilized, right? An actual January 6th on steroids happens, and one day the president leaves his residence in a helicopter, right? And these groups of neo-fascists and Nazis stormed his compound and stormed Parliament. And at that point in time, he had to flee Ukraine for Russia. So a bunch of Nazis literally stormed the government and took it over. And then on top of that,
sound familiar?
Right. And then on top of that, they then, because they didn't follow Ukrainian law, right? They didn't. They're for a president to be impeached, right? They need a 3/4 of parliament. They didn't even get that. So it was a sham coup, but that's what a coup is, right? It was a sham election when they tried to bring it back together, right? So factor all of this stuff going on now. So Ukraine is now essentially a NATO or American asset at this point, sitting at the doorsteps of Russia. And so what ends up happening is then Crimea gets annexed, and it's one of those things where the Western media blows that up and makes it seem like that Russia came in there and started to like take over. And but what ends up happening is like when the people of Crimea voted, right, even with like American polls, right, it was an overwhelming amount of people in Crimea that voted that they wanted to be a part of Russian Federation. It was like 96%. Only 2% of like Crimea wanted to stay with Ukraine, right? It was not one of those things where they were like kicking and screaming, because what ended up happening was one of the USSR's leader, what's it called, Khrushchev, he for whatever reason he gave away Crimea to Ukraine, which never sat right. Crimea was always like a part of Russia, and it was always like a very heavy Russian area. So when so again, Crimea's annexation was complicated. I'll be very real with you, but when it was annexed, right, that vote was democratic, and it was very much in the favor of them going to the Russian Federation. So let's look at the civil war that's going on in Ukraine from 2014 to 2022, and that's in eastern Ukraine. And so what ends up happening when this new government takes over in 2014, right? They're not the Nazis. So the Nazis didn't take over, right? That's a bad look. It's bad for PR, right? So they put other officials in there. And they have a Jewish president right now. Zelensky is a Jew, you know? That's where it gets kind of complex. You're like, well, how can they be a bunch of Nazis and this and that? Well, listen, it gets a little bit more complex than that. And so they have these battalions of right-wing extremists now fighting Russians in Eastern Europe and Donetsk and Luhansk, and that is the Donbass region that you hear about. And 14,000 people to this day since 2014 have been murdered by these Nazi militia in this bloody battle. Because what ended up happening as Ukraine was taken over, right, they started to outlaw Russian, and they started to do a lot of discriminatory stuff. And this part of Ukraine, this is where you hear Putin talking about sticking up for Eastern Ukrainians who are being, again, they're Russian separatists, right? Again, there is accuracy there, but again, he's pushing into his own war machine. He has his own agenda too. So I just want to be very clear that like he's not a good person for any of this, right?
Exactly. Hold on. Let me stop the music real quick, because I want to be clear on that. Because I was saying before, like, what's right and what's wrong. It's more like who's right and who's wrong. And like, there is no person that's a good person in this. Like, I can't stand Putin just as much as I can't stand Biden. Me personally, I want to make that clear.
Oh, speaking of Biden, so our
Yeah.
Vice President Joseph Biden, they coup a country in 2014, and then his son goes and sits on a board of an oil company in Ukraine in
Mm,
2014.
Oh,
Like,
oh, oh, yes.
like, like what the fuck? Huh?
Totally, yo, for real.
Like,
For real.
what? People were just like, all right, okay, I guess so. So okay, getting back to the moral of the story. So there's been a
Mm,
lot of violence in eastern Ukraine, and they're calling it a civil war. And I don't really know how much of that is actually a civil war, how much of that is a genocide. I don't know how much is actually fighting back, but I know 14,000 Ukrainians in the Eastern Europe or excuse me, in Eastern Ukraine are dead because this new faction took over and started to criminalize, well, not excuse me, they started to criminalize them and marginalize them. What does that sound like? So I put this comparison out on my Facebook, and I want to just talk about it with everybody here. So
yeah.
let's just take it to a comparison of the United States. Okay. Now let's imagine a country from the Eastern Hemisphere came in and took over the Canadian government. They took it over, right? And they did it like in a secretive way, and they installed all
Mhm.
of their own leaders. And so this country in the Eastern Hemisphere does not speak English, right? English is not their native language. And so they put in a leadership that then starts to ban, marginalize, and disenfranchise anyone who voted for the previous
Right,
leadership, right?
right.
And then on top of that, they then start to put weapons in Canada close to the United States border. I could just stop that right there. I'm telling you, that would be met with aggression, and we would stomp them out.
Yeah.
It would not, and we wouldn't think twice about it. The issue with Putin, and Putin's actually right about this, right? Is there was this nuclear agreement. It's called the INF. That was coming that like Europeans during the 80s, during Reagan's administration, really just jumped out in the streets and were like, "Yo, what are you doing?" And it's this agreement that stops mobilized missiles from being built close to Russian or socialist territories, right? Because what the issue was is the United States, as a wild ass country as they are, they were trying to put these strife missiles close to Russian territory, right? Or USSR, excuse me, USSR territory, and these are the type of missiles that hit their territory a couple hundred miles away in 6 minutes. And it's one of those things where you strike and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just there's no legit defense behind it. And so the people in Europe are like, well, hold on a second. If you do that, people here are gonna die. Like it's not your people are
Mm,
gonna die in Chicago, right? So Gorbachev and Reagan put up this treaty, the INS, which stopped these mobilized missiles to be used anywhere in the world, right? And so Donald Trump is such a destructive person, and I don't think he realizes how this, because he tried to do some things and he's just an idiot. He tore up that agreement. So Donald Trump got rid of that agreement, and so Biden Biden started to start the process in his administration of putting those missiles in Ukraine. And that's where we got to today, where NATO, Ukraine, the missiles, Russian border, it's a lot to it's a strategic move to really look at it from like a foreign policy position. For Russia, they felt as though it was a national security risk. And that's the thing when it comes
That
to
that
what.
and that you touched on it right there, and that makes perfect sense. If you look at it from the flip side, if everyone could stop thinking about things in a Western sense and what's good for the U.S., and you look at it for what may be good for Russia.
Right. And so that's what ended up happening. What ended up pushing everything over, right? And so now we have an active war going on between two countries. Um, and you have what you have to understand is that Western media is funded and paid for by our own capitalist oligarchs who have interest in the military industrial complex, right? So with their interest in the military industrial complex, what you're going to see is CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of them investing into humanitarian / war stories that are going to be pro-Ukraine, anti-Putin. And so what's happening is a lot of our people that we used to look up to, and people like you would call liberal media, or even they sound alike. And that should give everyone pause. They all sound alike. They all sound the same. And then like once I just started looking on Facebook, I was like, oh, stand for Ukraine. This is now. Hold on, guys. Whoa,
oh my goodness, merchandise and everything is out of this world. Like
people were paying for motherfucking missiles on Patreon. Like, hold on a second. We as a country just are funneling multi-millions and billions into Ukraine right now. We are fighting a war with Russia by proxy of Ukraine. We're giving them we're giving them Stinger missiles. I said in this article on your post about Israel was giving the Nazis, and that's wild. In 2018, Israel, they were giving the Nazis in Ukraine weapons to fight the Russian-speaking separatists. And I looked for even though like my timing when I put that post in there was off to the point I was making, I still can't find any receipt of them saying they stopped doing it. When did they stop?
Probably have. I mean,
yeah, but
there's so much going on that they're not reporting on right now because everyone's focused on this.
Right. And so getting to the fact of all of this is you have a war that's being perceived as this is Putin's fault. He's a bad person, and the United States and NATO are good people. Well, let's talk about how good NATO is. NATO bombed the hell out of Libya. Do you guys know what happened after Libya after they did that? Well,
Libya, no.
Libya, well, they fucking killed.
Oh, Libya.
Yeah. That 2011 in Libya where they killed Gaddafi, that was NATO. That was NATO.
Oh, okay.
So after that, like, which a lot of people forget, is that started ISIL or ISIS.
Mm-hmm.
Directly impact. It was like it made Libya one of the most unstable areas and regions in the world. Afghanistan. That was fucking NATO. 2. Iraq was solely us, right? Because we had no good reason to go to Iraq. If you remember the weapons of mass destruction stuff, right? The whole world knew that was bullshit. Iraq was solely us, right? Then there was Syria. NATO tried to do Syria. They lost that one. There are Yugoslavia, 1999. This North American treaty, which is not the CIA, right? This treaty is funding like right-wing militant leaders across the world to go against socialist factions. And this is why I go back to what the actual issue is, right? It is a fight against socialism. You cannot have a system of oligarchy, right? Or a system of capitalists, right? And have a significant portion of the world that prioritizes its people and destroys the classes. If you have a significant portion of the world doing that, right, you will threaten your way of life. And so fascism, right, because fascism in its own point, fascism has parts of socialism in it, because you know why? You degrade and oppress whole segments of your country and give to only one segment of your country. So there's socialism within fascism, right? Because it allows for it. You can harm people and exclude them from programming. Fuck, the United States does it, still does it, did it. The New Deal? The New Deal, that was damn near fascism. What black people were allowed to be a part of the New Deal? Like I'm just saying, like that is junior fascism. You know what I'm talking about? It's exclusionary. It helped pull white people into the wealth that they have to this day, right? Cause extreme redlining harm. Right. So, like, again, that's the United States. Fascism is okay in the Western world because they might, and they look down on those people too. This is the
And
other.
speaking of all that, like you bring up another topic, like anyone under, I think I posted a meme today about it, like good war and bad war and the color of skin tone that's associated, and them, them keeping certain skin tones or anyone that's not quote unquote what they deem Ukrainian from leaving the country, as if you want all the brown people to be the ones that are the casualties. That's just one aspect of my thinking.
Right. And so, like, when we look about all of this, right, understanding that there is a racial component to this as well, like you just said. The racial component, and the thing about it is, and only a portion of the segment of our media is getting this portion of it, right?
Yep.
It's the portion of we are still going to be humans even if there is a war.
Yep.
And it got reported by a Western source, the BBC source, that Ukrainian Nigerian refugees, right, were being backed up at Poland and were being the last to be let out. It also let me realize, and I wanted to pose this on my Facebook wall, but I'll pose it here. If the United States was on the brink of a war in our capitalist society, right, and the country and the world had like advised people to leave Ukraine weeks in advance. I don't know if you remember this back in January, but they were warning people like, hey, get the fuck out of here, right? Until it got to like, oh shit, this is really happening right now, right? Think about how many poor people who will be forced by their jobs to stay working in the midst of a war threat. Yep. I thought about that. I thought, how many people stayed here because they couldn't leave because of their job or their financial situation?
Yep.
Capitalist country, man. And these are real life things. And just to understand something. Okay, this is one thing I didn't tell you, but I've said it on my Facebook thread, and I want to say here. The difference between the fascism here and there in Ukraine is it is 1,000% acknowledged. There is a segment of the Ukrainian National Guard that is a right-wing battalion called Azov Bativ, all right? And it's Azov something. And they are Nazis. They're Nazis. They have been recognized by the government and validated a part of the National Guard. It would be no different if the U.S. National Guard had a segment called the Proud Boys segment, and you could go join your local Proud Boys. There's no different. So when I say watch putting that "I stand with Ukraine" stuff in your profile, you don't know the whole story. It is very complex. So then we got to look at Zelensky. Who is Zelensky? Zelensky is a Jewish man, and he's a puppet. He was put in. He was a former actor presidents, right? We love actor politicians, right?
Right. Gotta love him.
He's a part of, I think his party is called the People's Party. His party is this really irrelevant new party that was started like 2-3 years ago. He's a man of the people in that sense. Like, he's charismatic, and he is the president that Trump tried to. Trump got actually impeached over when he was trying to get him to incriminate the Bidens in that recorded phone call. That's Zelensky. So what Trump was doing, right? And so I'm going to give you some insight on Trump. Trump was giving Ukraine weapons. So this is what makes me irate about Trump. He acts like he likes Putin, right? And he likes Russia, or excuse me, he likes Putin. But then, like, he was giving Ukraine weapons and money. And so what he did was he blackmailed Zelensky with the weapons and money to get, like, stuff on Hunter Biden to try to him. He was trying to affect the United States election, which is like super illegal too, right? Super illegal, and it backfired on him. Obviously, it backfired on him, and so you have this situation where, oh, hold on a second, I gotta say goodnight to my son real quick.
Well, while we're at it, Matt, that's, you know what, I'm inclined to agree with you. You know, I wouldn't be surprised, given that Black Lives Matter and anyone that's pro-black, deemed terrorist, whereas any kind of white nationalists are not, still have not been and will not. You bring up a good point there. Just seeing all the different, while we at the photo, you know, Indians and Black immigrants in the videos, them being shot at, kept from leaving. Just in general, the fact that we're so inundated and everyone's so worried about the merchandise that, you know, you're seeing for all of this, it kind of irks me because there's so much other shit going on that's been going on that's just as significant, but it's brown people, so no one wants to care about it. And I'm not gonna speak on this. I really don't. If you don't want to speak on Palestine or Sudan or Libya or Somalia, I don't want to talk.
Right.
I'm talking about this right now specifically because there's so many different things a part of it that you spoke on, John, that I feel like people have not been talking about. They're just like putting their fist up saying, I stand with Ukraine, not really understanding it.
And that's what you have to understand too. Like, you hit it right on the head. There is no, like I said earlier, there's only one side of this anti-war. There is no, I stand with.
Thank you.
This whole bullshit of Zelensky is this and that. That picture of him in the army fatigues, right? Whatever they call, because it's not the army, but the fatigue. That's a picture from 2021. I'm not saying he's not out there fighting. What I'm saying is that picture is not from. There's this viral picture of Zelensky saying, "I'm going to fight. I'm not hiding," and blah blah blah. Well, first of all, we get if you leave the country, you essentially do give it up. So, like, obviously you're not going to do that. But, well, obviously he's not going to do that. That's not obvious for everybody. And so the other thing about it is this viral image was going around about, like, how he's going to fight with the people. And I'm like, he's not doing that. He needs to negotiate. And I was just like, there's just all this propaganda stuff that's coming up on social media. It's coming up even on the regular news media, right? And it's just telling the story of, like, hope, and they're the fighters, they're the underdogs, they're the small country against the red sickle. Jesus Christmas, it is nauseating, right? And so you look at, like, what is going on. Zelensky is not a good guy. Zelensky is a puppet. He is looking to be a part of NATO, and he has chosen a side, Ukraine, and that side puts them in imminent danger from Russia. Excuse me, let me back up here. Puts them in imminent danger with Putin. Be very clear here. The Russian people have nothing to fucking do with this. The Russian people, for the greater part of the last 100 years, have come from a system of monarchy to socialism to capitalism. Okay? They have one of the swiftest changes of government policy and geopolitics over the last 150 years in ways you cannot. You go from the Romanovs to Marxist-Leninism, right? And then you go to that period between what's it called, the end of the USSR, right, to Putin. And so that end of that USSR is when the class stuff started to reemerge back into the USSR. So you have to understand that Russia, as a country today, has been through so much turmoil, as far as class is concerned, as far as government is concerned, and as far as geopolitics is concerned, as far as terrorism is concerned, as far as anti-Semitism, every single thing you can think about, right? They were the most murdered in World War II. They had 27 million casualties. Um, they have gone through it. And now we have this thing where Putin's going to war. And now we're stopping Apple Pay and Google Play in these pieces. We're sanctioning the people. Like, why are we hurting the working class?
Right.
What the fuck? And we're doing so much of hurting the working class, right? They're talking about what's it called? They're talking about like all the sanctions and the bans of like the products like Coca-Cola. Oh my lord. There was this thing. This is called the what is it called? There was this federation of cats. All right. I forget the name of the federation, but they banned Russian breed cats from being a part of this federation. This is how fucking right. What? EA Sports is getting
like
this is McCarthyism. This is just like brainwashing. This is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
We have such an understanding that like Russia bad, Soviet Union
that part.
Bad.
Yep.
You go to breadline, blah blah blah. Like this is craziness. It's getting people hysterical.
Talk about it.
And so I'll give my spin on it. How does this affect African Americans, right? I'll tell you right now how it affects us. It affects us because it's showing us globally, right, that our oppressor does treat the other half just the same. And
yes,
they will spread the narrative, they will exploit it and do what they need to do to make sure that the working class people are subjugated at the will of the state. And again, that's Russia's MO too. I want to be very clear about that. But the thing you gotta understand, they're not that much different. Don't sit over here and pick a side. You don't get to pick a side. Like there are billionaire oligarchs. Okay, everyone's an oligarch. The whole thing, like there are billionaire oligarchs that sit with Putin and him, and our oligarchs are very much. No one wants to research the history unless it's a trendy meme. Matt, you're 1000% right. It's just laziness. I thought it was inappropriate that anyone was talking about Ukraine without like doing any type of perfunctory like research. Ukraine is so complex. Ukraine is so difficult. Ukraine has gone through so many regime changes, so many ideologies. It's so Nazified. It has a lot of socialism. There have been people on both sides of all of this. It's not one ideology that's ever been there. As I mentioned earlier, they had a big Jewish population. They almost butchered They butchered a significant. They killed one day. The Nazis out there. They killed 39,000 Jews in 2 days in 1939, and it was in Kiev, and it was just this big massacre. Like Ukraine is a fucking nightmare when it comes to its history. And what side do you want to pick? It's the easy one. It's the socialism side. It's the side of the people. But right. Ukraine has been so destabilized because, like I said, our government, the CIA, these NGOs, right? They have funded efforts to Nazify and destabilize Ukraine. Because what happens, right? What happens if the people that have access to the resources, right, to the oil, what if they socialize the oil in Ukraine? What would happen there? They would literally take a product that is making billions and billions of dollars out of the hands of a private entity, which is making global individuals who trade in oil, right? Natural gas. They would take billions in revenue out of their pockets. What do you need oil for? Well, everything right now. Fossil fuel. If the people, if they socialize Ukraine, that would have an impact in the world
Right.
that would have influence that would really just destroy pockets. And so that's why Ukraine is very much important. And yeah, at the end of the day, yeah, Matt's right. At the end of the day, the West is doing it to control the oil. And that's consistent. That's consistent with that's consistent with Venezuela. That's consistent with it's consistent with Iraq. Well, actually, like I said, Iraq was really just a sham for them to like launch off into Iran. That never quite happened. If you want to know why we pulled out of Iraq, it's because I just learned about this today. Was we pulled out of Iraq because Iraq made us agree to this. They said, if you stay here, you're gonna have to answer for like war crimes in the future. And like Obama and them were like, nah, that's too much. And they dipped out. I'm not kidding. I forget what that was called, but you can Google that. It was the Iraqi government was trying to get us to start being held accountable for war crimes.
Well, yeah, that's yeah. Yep. Talk about it. Yep. Yep and yep.
So
well,
I think
we got 57 minutes we hitting, so shoot your last thought. And we can hit full circle on this because I think we touched on everything.
Here's the deal. I don't know what's going to happen or what's going to come out of this.
Right.
But I think what you have to understand is that Eastern Europe has a very rich history of monarchy and fascism, and the USSR was one of the only stabilizing forces that brought socialism there. And there's been turmoil ever since the Bolshevik Revolution, which was what happened. And so what you have to understand is for the last 80 years and probably the next 80 years, right, is there's going to be turmoil, and anywhere where there's going to be any hint or trace of socialism, there's going to be a right-wing force there. And it's the reason why we haven't gotten rid of our right-wing forces, and there's a reason why the imperialism of us has an interest in stomping out socialism. So I want to say that the interest of Ukraine is very much the interest of NATO and the United States. And that's all I have.
Yo, John, thank you. Seriously, it's always a pleasure having you spit your shit. You shoot off a lot, and for me personally, it takes some time to dissect through, and I hear you, but like it, like after a bit, it like marinates in my head. Yeah, exactly, man. Oh man, this was definitely a very layered and juicy session, and I urge people for anything, for anything that was spoken on in this specific episode, go and look up, rewind back and dissect it, and check out stuff for your own research. Google anything that we're talking about here, and do your own research for yourself. But the information.
One last thing I want to drop on your people. I didn't say this. I want to mention it. NATO, the North American Treaty Order, whatever the fuck, right? They invited Western Germany to NATO in 1955. For those of you who don't know the significance of this, when the fuck did World War II end? NATO wanted Nazi Germany essentially to be a part, and they let them apart in 1955. Like, just to let you know, like, this fascism thing is a Western will and want. Now I'll leave you guys with that. And they excluded the USSR from it. That's why the Warsaw Pact was created in response to that. But just wanted to say that it's very complex, a lot going on. Sorry.
No, you're good. Wow. Yeah, that. Whew. Dang, y'all. Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure, John. It's been a pleasure, all of the viewers, for tuning in. You can always comment, like, and share, and you can keep this conversation going as usual. We love y'all. Make sure you meditate on your path, celebrate your being, liberate your spirit, and educate yourself. I'm Jontel. Have a great night.
See ya.